Many years ago, some friends of mine and I decided to take a road trip. We decided to go to the mountains of New Mexico, of all places, in February in a 15-passenger van. So as we're making our way out there, we are going up a winding road with snow-covered mountains, single lane, and with about a 70-foot drop on one side. Now, the 70-foot drop was on the passenger side. My friend Dan was sitting in the front seat, and he would just keep squirming and grunting and making noises because we were getting close to the edge and he could see what potentially might happen. Now, it was clear he did not trust me in that situation. I mean, if I'm honest, I probably didn't trust myself. I was a 20-something driving a 15-passenger van in the mountains of New Mexico in the snow. It was a dangerous situation. But it got to the point where it was so stressful, I stopped. I looked at him and I said, either tell us we're driving off a cliff or shut up. We were at our breaking points and we all laughed and moved on. But the reality was he didn't have trust in that situation, and the posture of his body showed it. Now flip forward a few decades and we'll go on a family road trip. We'll load everybody up into the minivan. Everybody has their pillows and their iPads and everything they need. And what inevitably happens is everybody falls asleep and Dad is driving in silence. That is a picture of what trust looks like. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus is preaching to the crowd and he says something that has become just an earmark for Christians throughout the centuries. He says, love your enemies. But before that, he actually references a law that's found in the Torah where it says that the punishment has to fit the injury. He says an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This is really referred to as the principle of proportionate retribution. Now that is a mouthful I've had to practice saying many times. The point is that the punishment has to fit the crime. Now, in Exodus 21, we read about this in the Torah, but the reality was that human civilization had been dealing with justice in this way for hundreds of years, even before it became a part of the Hebrew law. In 1772 BC, there was a Babylonian king by the name of Hammurabi, and he was known as the Builder King. Not only was he a brilliant military mind that conquered all of Mesopotamia or modern-day Syria, but they called him the Builder King because he was fixated on infrastructure and building and creating a system of justice that had become known as the Code of Hammurabi. In the early 19th century, archaeologists discovered a 7.5-foot obelisk with 282 laws with scalable punishments that are traced back directly to Hammurabi. And it said in that code, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Now, fast forward 1,800 years in the future, where Jesus is preaching the Sermon on the Mount. To the Jewish culture of the time, it was no longer about the brutality of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It was replaced with a system of fines and things that had to be done for justice. The point was that having a system for justice in man-made justice was not what Jesus was bringing. So Jesus goes on to give 3 analogies. He first says, if someone slaps you on your cheek, turn and offer the other. Someone sues you for your coat, give them also your shirt. And if a soldier asks you to carry his gear 1 mile, go 2 miles. Now, all of these statements have become normal phrases in our everyday life, right? Go the extra mile, turn the other cheek, the shirt off my back. But in the Jewish context, they would understand these statements differently. See, being slapped wasn't so much about the physical act of being slapped. It was offensive. It was like someone spitting in your face. So there was a sense of justice in that to not turn the other cheek. If someone sued you, there was actually boundaries within the law that said your outer garments could be sued for, but your inner garments were off limits. Basically, that there was a line. Justice had a line to protect the individuals that would be in a lawsuit. And then the last one is called the law of impressment. So the Roman Empire had invaded Israel. They were the occupying military force, And a law had been put in place that if any Jewish man was picked by a Roman soldier, they had to carry their gear for up to a mile. Now, not a mile in our distance, it was 1,000 paces. And the gear could weigh anywhere up to 100 pounds. But that had a limit as well. See, a Roman soldier could not ask you as a Jewish man to carry their gear beyond 1 mile. So when Jesus is telling them to go the extra mile and give them the shirt that's off limits and turn the other cheek, really what he's saying is stop trusting man's system and trust God. It's interesting in the law of impressment, if a Roman soldier made a Jewish man go more than 1 mile, they actually could face criminal charges. It's interesting, the way of Jesus actually turns the victim into a victor. It puts the Roman soldier in the position of having to actually ask to take the gear back off of the individual. What Jesus is saying to the audience listening is he's saying, stop trying to find justice in a broken system. It's always going to come up short. But that's the way that we all work, right? We want to find justice in the system that we live in. Jesus goes on to say, you know the law that says love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemy. Pray for those that persecute you. The word love here that Jesus uses, I love this definition. It actually means to prefer the things that God prefers. Live with a love empowered by Christ. And persecution actually means that people are hunting you down intentionally. They're going out of their way to do harm to you. And Jesus is saying, love those people. Do the preferred thing that I would prefer you do and pray for them. Pray for the good of them. And this isn't just about loving our enemies and displaying God's goodness to them. It's about us having trust in Jesus. Jesus is saying that no matter what you face and what you go through, when you try to find justice in man's system, it's always going to be short. So the way of Jesus says, will you put your trust in me? I go back to the original story. When we fight for justice in this world, all we're doing is squirming and fighting and grunting and making noise and telling the driver of our lives, we don't really trust you. We don't trust you to set things straight. We don't trust you to make things right. And Jesus is saying, if you want to follow me, you have to do these things because it ultimately shows that you trust me. But what's the point in all of it? Well, Jesus unwraps that in verse 48 of Matthew chapter 5. He says, when you do this, when you live this way, when you live with this love that prefers the things of God and it is empowered by God himself, you become perfect, like the Father is perfect. Now, this word perfect, it doesn't mean blameless. It doesn't mean faultless. It doesn't mean tightrope without ever taking a misstep. What it means is complete, fully mature, developed. Another definition is having gone through all the stages. So what Jesus is saying is when you learn to do these things, when you learn to live above offense, when you learn to live above the line, when you learn to live at a different level than what justice dictates, the way of Jesus says you will actually be made complete. In John 10:10, Jesus said, I came so that you might have life and life to the fullest, life complete. So learning how to love our enemies is not really about forgiving people and letting them get off the hook or get away with injustice. It's really about saying, Jesus, we trust you. And out of our obedience and our trust in you, we're going to live a different way. Enemies are all around us, people that want to offend us, hurt us, do unjust things to us. They exist. It can be in your workplace, it can be in your home, it could just be in our community. The way of Jesus says, will we trust God for him to make things right? We have to protect our hearts and choose to obey him no matter what the circumstance.